What was life like before smartphones? Write in the comments what you think about this. What did you have? Enjoy the show. Story 1. I'm 25, so I had some time in my life without a smartphone, but we always had a PC at home. I was talking about this with my friend who turned 18 last year, and we were both like, what did people do at home when they had no phone to use when they were bored? Did they just sit down and do nothing? And he was like, I went to my grandparents who live in a rural area without these things, and that's exactly what they did. Bro, I just could never. Story 2. You had to buy a game guide if you wanted to beat a hard game. You called someone's house, or before everyone had a landline, you knocked on their door to see if they were home, let alone if they were around to hang out. In my generation, AIM was the new, fast way to talk to people. Hearing that door creak knowing they were online was such a good feeling, and you knew they were probably home. If you didn't come home, meet your parents when you said you would, they would drive around and find you, and it would not be a fun car ride home. People sold stuff door to door instead of cold calling you. Story 3. If you had a good memory, you were the source of information for many people. People enjoyed talking to you and asked questions with excitement to learn what you knew. Most people didn't have opinions on subjects they didn't know about. It was very easy to have in-depth conversations with people as we all had extra time for things, and it was a fast way of learning something new. We shared many things. Not everyone had to have everything all at the same time. Newspapers had really nice articles, and science magazines were absolutely mind-blowing. You would go for exploration walks when in a new area to get a feel of it. If you found a cute little coffee or pastry shop, then you would feel like you were the richest person on the planet. If you told people about it, they would love you for it. Story 4. I was the last generation before smartphones. 31 now. The iPhone and other modern smartphones first came out in the late 00s when I was like 15, 16. Not many people had them though, and they were nothing like they are now. Even after a couple years with them coming out, nobody sat on them even if they did have them. Anyway, it was just better. There weren't rooms full of people sitting on their phones. People lived more in the moment. The biggest difference is probably the expectations smartphones have put into people's heads. What I mean is, so many people now compare themselves to people they see on social media apps and stuff like that. They sit on Instagram and TikTok and think their lives should be like that rather than just living their lives. There was way less political toxicity too. With no Twitter and other social media apps, people weren't constantly being rage-baited into hating each other. There was a lot less hate. Relationships were better. You couldn't just hop on Tinder and find 100 people you thought would be so much better, especially women. Today, they can find 100 guys way more attractive than anyone they've been with in minutes. It's made dating so hard. Everyone is replaceable now. Life was less toxic. Story 5, very simple. I mean really simple. 0 distractions. No pings, no searching, Googling on web, replying to email, etc. You were able to focus on one task at a time. You got to use your brain more. X/looking at a map. How to get somewhere. You learn real fast for a sense of where you are based off landmarks. Say you're in Newport Beach and want to go to Monterey Cay. You know that you're going the wrong direction if the ocean is on the right. People actually called to talk to someone instead of just texting. There was more of a sense of communication and verbalization, so your ears, mouth, and brain were used more. You got to learn how to interact with strangers if you were calling up a store or business. Also, if you wanted to call a business, you flipped through an alphabetized phone book for names of businesses and their phone numbers. There was also no Yelp or Google reviews if you wanted to know if the services were good, legit. It was more direct and social. Didn't have to rely on a device to pass time. You had to get creative. So for me, I was always playing sports like basketball, tennis, working out, and going surfing a ton. I also read comics, collected sports cards, and built models and watched TV movies on my VCR DVD. Without smartphones, you really get to know who you are and a sense of identity. You got to rely solely on your brain. So let's say you wanted information on the monarch butterflies. You went to the library, hopped on computer, looked up butterfly and went to look for book based off the Dewey Decimal System, then actually read the book. Even the longer, older way, search in a card catalog. There was no AI, so no autocorrect, so you should have a basic to intermediate understanding of spelling and grammar. You had to be patient if you got home from school/work/etc. if your friend, family, date called and left a message. Messages were either told to you by family, note on fridge door, or left on voicemail, or you had to call and ask family about who called and what it was about. Everything wasn't instant. so you had to wait for things. There was no questioning of existence, so you didn't have to rely on likes or follows by other to approve one's existence, because you're breathing, you're living, so you know you're alive. I'm going to be very transparent. I personally think life was funner and more simple back then, but I do embrace smartphones. But say if it were to go away completely, it wouldn't faze me one bit, because I know what to expect, and embrace not being lazy and using my brain and being creative with my time. Story 6. I'll just talk about the time before cell phones and personal computers and even answering machines in America. As a young kid, when you wanted to know where your friends were, you either had to call them on the landline early enough before they left their houses, or you had to ride your bike to all your friends' houses and find the one that had all the bikes parked out front. Or you had to ride around and find them. Your friends' parents had the same authority as yours and would discipline you as if you were their own. When I got older and lived in a bachelor pad and we all had cars, you got up early on the weekends, showered early, and got ready to go wherever you guys were going to go. Once they left the house, you weren't going to find them till everyone came back in the evening. To this day, when I wake up, I put a foot on the floor, step right into the shower, and get dressed before I do anything. I don't get into sweats and sit around or anything before I'm ready to walk out the door. That habit will never die for me. As others have said, you were expected to be able to figure out where you're driving to before you leave. You had to guess on the best route or listen to the traffic reports to see where the accidents were. You had to give yourself a lot of extra time in case it all went to shit or if you got lost. Paper maps were good. If you had a Thomas Brothers guide, you were invincible. The only time you saw any wild videos were on the news. If you missed them, you never saw them again. The Twilight Zone accident where Vic Morrow and the 2 kids got killed was one example, although it got played a lot. They also showed people getting killed on the news with a warning to turn off the TV if children were in the room. If you were watching TV, you'd get yelled at for interrupting because you couldn't rewind and you wouldn't see the show again until the fall when reruns came out. You went to the bathroom during commercial breaks and paid attention during the show. If you missed a call, sometimes they'd leave a message someone would write down on a piece of paper with a return number. Sometimes it would take a couple days to track someone down. You memorized phone numbers. If you were in a shop, the numbers were written on the wall in pencil, in no particular order, next to the phone that was mounted to the wall. 12 channels on a TV with no remote. ABC, CBS, NBC were the bulk of the networks. The news came on in the evenings at 1800, and reporters with integrity like Walter Cronkite would simply report the top stories with no bias, and it was left up to the viewer to decide how they felt about it. Family programming was at 2000, and there was a different show every night of the week. Adam 12, Emergency The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, later on Dallas. Anyone remember Who Shot JR? Peyton Place. Monday Night Football or the World Series would preempt regularly scheduled programming, and you'd miss the show, and you were left wondering till the spring. The news would repeat at 2200, and if anything broke between the early news and the late news, there'd be a special report after the 2200 airing. At the end of the days, broadcast the national anthem would play, followed by High Flight. It would be red while Colonel Bruce Peterson tore up the sky in a USAF T-38 in a sign-off that still raises the hair on my arm just thinking about it. Series had almost 30 episodes a season and were heavy on good writing and character development. We all hated to see the words at the end of the show continued next week. Cars had radios, usually just AM. No AC, but they had wind wings. Kids rode in the back and there were no car seats, and seat belts weren't a mandatory thing. However, when you did get to ride in the front seat and a parent had to slam on the brakes, you always got the arm in the face. People were engaged with each other more. Immigration hadn't exploded. Everyone either spoke English or they were expected to learn. Immigrants came to America to be Americans. They put a heavy priority on their children being raised as Americans. As an old Polish man once told his son, "A friend of mine, we left Poland because it was a shithole. Why in the hell would you want your go back? We're Americans now." People didn't isolate themselves under earpods and headphones. You interacted with the people around you while in public. It was normal to strike up a conversation with a complete stranger. Story 7. In the early 2000s, when going somewhere new or on holiday, my friends and I would print paper maps from multimap.com to help us find our way around. It's hard to imagine living without a GPS in the pocket now. Smartphones also meant many people no longer needed printers at home anymore. Surfing the web was an event. You had to sit at a desk, power up, log on, dial up, UK pre-broadband. Text messaging was a new thing, and you were limited to a number of characters for your 10p, 140 characters, I think. We tended to still use the landline at home and usually try people on their landline before calling their mobile because it was cheaper than mobile to mobile. You had to visit the bank to do banking or log on to a desktop. Share my location. It was hard to find friends at busy events. There are downsides. People drop real-life conversations to take calls, get caught up in addictive games with paid-for content, and don't talk like they used to. We all shop all the time. It used to be limited by opening hours. Story 8, 35M. Different, for sure. Even if I do on occasion find my smartphone and tablet somewhat handy devices, I often find themselves also a modern reason of frustration due to a number of reasons. But most important reason, the fact it can become difficult to be unreachable when you feel like being unreachable. And the fact it can turn a normal life going at normal, comfortable pace, completely unnecessary suddenly into a fast pace and stressful, social and work-wise fast lane and/or environment. There, for loss of social and work comfort, in some cases along with a loss of social and private rights, as well loss of social private time, privacy, and its security. I'm sure most of you can even imagine what I mean and therefore talked about and/or meant to say. And all of you just think, I am an old man trying to be hip by trying to be funny, by trying to troll any of you by describing just your current lives, and you don't know else and/or better. Story 9. I left high school in 2005. I think that's important since some comments are acting like smartphones were invented in the 70s, and we all played with sticks and stones until the iPhone came out. In the 2000s, we still had CD players, then MP3 players, then iPods. We listened to music when we were bored, then later once everyone had basic cell phones. Everyone played Snake and a few others on Nokias. BlackBerry later became huge and had Brick Breaker that was pretty good IIRC. Later phones, technically smartphones but nowhere near as advances as an iPhone, were designed around gaming or being foldable or ultra slim. Things like the N-Gage came out in 2002. If you had access to a PC, then you used MSN Messenger, which was basically WhatsApp on PC. My entire school was on it. Going back to before younger kids had phones, kids' culture went through phases with toys designed for slightly older children. Things like Furbies, Pogs, Tamagotchis, yo-yos, Pokemon cards, actually playing the game in the playground at school. These things were insanely popular and profitable back then. The phase would last a year or two, then something new would come out and everyone would get it for Christmas or other holidays, birthdays. Story 10. I was a kiddo at the time, but we still had the phone book, and the main source of knowledge was the books we had at home. I could talk with friends on the phone for hours, but only on the days when it was cheap. When I met someone on the street who was fun to play with, we exchanged home phone numbers. All the numbers of my besties I knew of course by heart. I also used to get lost pretty often, and it was kind of one of my hobbies cause this way I could explore the town. We went to a DVD rental shop to get a particular movie, and knew if it was going to be a good movie. If my buddies wanted me to go play with them, they actually came to my street and shouted so I would come down. Most of the time, my grandma had absolutely no clue where I am and checked on me if I didn't show up for dinner at the set time. Old neighbors were discussing what happened in the latest episode of the popular series, sitting in the yard together, and if you missed the episode, you could hear them retell it. No way to watch the episode. I couldn't give my friends a DVD with my favorite movies, so I would just retell everything that happened in those movies. It was great. Oh, and when my friends were away for summer holidays, we exchanged paper letters. I remember telling in great detail what kind of fruits I ate, for example. My bestie's dumb younger brother drew dicks on her letter to me. Story 11. People actually looked around a room and made eye contact, compared to how they have their face in their phone all the time now. Older people are just as guilty as younger ones about this, in my experience. When you were out of the house, people couldn't get a hold of you until you got back home. That was nice. This is for cell phones in general, not just smartphones. You couldn't look up things like you can now. You were out of luck if you wanted to know what time something was or some other random fact, and you weren't near a PC or laptop. Smartphones are great for this, IMO. Driving in an unfamiliar area and relying on maps sucked compared to having GPS on your smartphone. This is another one of those aspects of life where smartphones have been a huge positive. You couldn't take high-quality photos or videos very often, unless you owned a nice camera or video recorder. Therefore, you couldn't easily capture an event like you can now, but you were also more present, because you weren't staring into a camera when that event was happening. Social media really took off with smartphones. When social media became a thing, It was a cool way to keep in touch with distant relations, old friends, and former classmates you might never see again as you got older. This was kinda cool. However, it eventually became a place for comparing yourself to others, especially those who appeared to have a better life than you or were hotter than you. Not so cool. While it has benefits, I think life was better pre-social media. I used to read more books than I do now. I think I spend a lot of my free time reading Reddit and news and other short articles online. Have smartphones and social media ruined my attention span? Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Story 12. I actually did the crosswords and other activities on the back of the cereal boxes when I ate cereal. Pooping was just lost time, or spent reading the label of whatever was in arm's reach. Getting to places you didn't already know how to reach was inconvenient enough that people sometimes spent $300, $400 on dedicated GPS devices. You had to buy the whole stupid album on CD, even if you only liked one or two songs on it. People actually owned, or at least referenced, multi-volume encyclopedias so they could look up something when they were curious. You really thought to yourself, is this worth the film, when thinking of taking a photo, because those things were limited lol. Story 13. I didn't feel as accessible as I do today. Boredom was a thing. You watched whatever was on TV at the time. If you got stuck in a video game, you had to read a book about it. Unless you carried a camera around with you, you weren't taking photos. You'd listen to tapes as is, or if you made them, a mixtape of your favorite songs you waited by the radio to record. Attention spans were way more robust. Visits to the local library were common, and you got the most out of it you could. If you had a question, you'd either look in a book, ask someone, or you just didn't know. Story 14. Here's an interesting take that I don't see people discuss much. Things had staying power. A joke you'd see on TV would continue to be funny for a longer amount of time because it wasn't constantly repeated every 3 seconds by everyone. Memories were a lot more special because there was a good chance you didn't have pictures or videos of a certain thing that happened. You just saw and experienced it. Think about Hawk Tuah. Most people are already completely burned out on it, think it's really dumb, and it's basically done as a joke, versus something like Leroy Jenkins, which, since you didn't have instant access to it at any given time, stayed funny for literally years. Story 15. You all have some good nostalgia glasses, or maybe I am old enough to have lived both lives in my country. I'm also going to talk more about smartphones versus old cell phones. Think early 2000s Nokia models, Huawei and other brands, hell even Motorola Razr. Before smartphones, car trips were either listening music or reading something, which I guess is good. But now you have access to books online or heard podcasts/documentaries. Either you had money to pay for a Garmin or one of those brands of GPS to have on your car, or have a map with you. Trips would be a bit more adventurous and more time to get to places and no traffic information. Early phone cameras sucked. Good moments or memories were either lost to time and memory, or had a really, really bad picture compared to now, of course, unless you had a camera in hand at the moment. Easy to lose track of family and friends. Nowadays, a big advantage is that friends and family are at a fingertip reach. Maintaining friendships and contact is a lot easier. Before, you could have a good friend who moved, and you probably never even saw them again. Things were also more simple. You didn't have a botnet in the internet breaching, hacking, and social engineering, so 2FA, MFA, and other things were not that integral. Hell, I remember the bank had an MFA method, which was a decoding card in physical to be able to do transfers. There might be some negative things, but people are really bad at looking at positive things. Nowadays, we have so much convenience. Before smartphones, really, if you didn't know something, that's it. Today, you have the world at the palm of your hands, but people just focus on the negative stuff for some reason. I know some people that had they had a cell phone or a smartphone when things got bad, they might have had a better outcome on their life. Story 16 depends on how far back before smartphones you mean. Right before smartphones, we had GPS units either in the car or we installed them on the windshield. As far as communication, we used cell phones and before that pagers. There were no apps, but there were websites you could order stuff on. So totally depends on how far back. Before cellular, when you left, you were dead to the world. So you told your family a time frame before leaving or left a note on the fridge. Email was a thing, but before that, people left notes. So completely depends on the time frame. Story 17. I know we live in a time where misinformation is a big talking point, but pre-internet, people could just make anything up and there was no way to fact-check it without a library card. It's why religion, UFO, ghost sightings, etc. have all reduced since then because liars are easier to expose now. For example, I remember a guy threatening to beat the shit out of me for explaining to him that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie didn't actually happen. Another example would be the constant stream of discussions about celebrities who were still alive. An even better example of pre-internet world would be the West Memphis 3 trial, where 3 teenagers were convicted of first-degree murder based on the evidence that they wore black and listened to Metallica. The occult expert they had on the stand was, much like most people back then, a clueless old man just making shit up. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.